I'm going to point out just one big fundamental problem with the series finale of Game of Thrones. I'm going to point it out because I think it's something other people will not say. I think other commentators and critics are going to be preoccupied with many of the very real, very glaring errors in continuity, problems with characters, problems with holes in the plot, loose ends and storylines that were never tied up, just all kinds of things that flatly make no sense or that they find subjectively dissatisfactory. I am not going to discuss any of that. I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back to a time when you were trying to convince your friends to watch this show. Maybe a brother, a sister, maybe your boyfriend or girlfriend. At some point in your life, maybe 5 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, you were writing an email to a friend or phoning a friend and saying, hey, you know what? You should give this TV show a chance. It's not like Lord of the Rings. It's not like Dungeons and Dragons. It's not like some mainstream crap on TV you grew up with. It's not the next Xena Warrior princess. And you can probably remember, even if distantly, why it was or how it was you justified this to your friends. For many people, they probably said, in whatever words, the reason why you should watch this show is realism. And in the last few years, that concept has become the butt of jokes. People have said, oh, well, how can you talk about realism in a TV show that has dragons and fire magic and wizards and what have you? And yet we all know, we all remember from those first 4 years of this TV show what it was that realism meant. It is, very simply, a sense of social realism, a sense of political realism that this TV show had and that it lost. I'm going to illustrate this with two elements that are flagrantly on display in the season finale, but they've really impaired the quality of the last several years of the TV show. Do you notice that people just stand around like dancers, like performance artists on a soundstage, ready to go into action? People, sometimes hundreds of people in a scene, sometimes dozens, just stand in silence. Wasn't like that in season 1. Wasn't like that in seasons 2, 3, and 4. Okay? And that's now become routine. Characters communicate over a huge distance by whispering or speaking in a very low voice when facing away from the character they're talking to. Sometimes while walking, sometimes while standing in a throne room, and there's nobody else around. Now, my problem here isn't just one of style. I think it really is one of substance. Think back to the first time Tyrion Lannister was put on trial. The first and second times Tyrion Lannister is put on trial. He's shouting, right? He's shouting at the people who are judging him. The first trial, you'll remember, ends with Bronn fighting in a trial by combat. The second trial ends with him murdering Shay. Long story short, right? There was a room full of skeptical people, right? Different actors asking different questions, and even if they weren't speaking, adding their own weight and scrutiny to the scene. There were different competing interests. And, this reflects and it also exemplifies the way in which the early seasons of the show conveyed a sense of social realism, a sense of political complexity, of many different players in the game having different motives. Now, the books are even better, and here's why. In the books, when Jaime Lannister goes to visit a prison, he meets a character who's called the chief under-jailer. He's the head of the underground prison, thus the under-jailer. And when Jaime Lannister meets that character does not think of himself as a bit part. That character does not think of himself as a mere peasant. That character thinks of himself as the main character in his own story. The way George R. R. Martin writes is that even the smallest characters are, from their own perspective, the protagonist, the hero, and the villain in their own tragedy, in their own triumph. And that, again, adds a sense of social realism, political realism. And Jaime Lannister has this long and for him, very frustrating and annoying dialogue with this character. And again, Brienne of Tarth, she thinks of herself as a major character, and she runs into other characters who consider her a fly, who consider her a gnat. And from those characters' perspective, they instead ought to be the main character of Game of Thrones. So that's a step beyond merely the type of social realism you get in the earlier trials of Tyrion Lannister. But what we got in this episode, in the finale, and what we get in the last several seasons, this vacuous silence, the scenes of just two characters standing around whispering at each other in a huge room with a lot of distance between them when they shouldn't be whispering, or indeed even scenes of a quote-unquote court that is in no way courtly. Like you have all kinds of people getting drunk in the same room with Daenerys and Jon Snow, and yet, we have these very wooden, poorly staged dialogues and what have you. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't look anything like the court of King Joffrey that we knew from the earlier seasons of the TV show, right? It doesn't even look like the scene in the Great Sept of Baelor or something, where we get the sense of a complex, feudal society with many players, with many objectives, so on and so forth. For me, I feel that the writers checked out. I don't want to put a specific date on it. For me, the extent to which the writers had just abdicated their responsibility to write was emblematized by the dialogue in which Sansa Stark says to Tyrion dismissively, oh, don't bother to say anything. I'll just imagine that you said something. I'll just imagine that you said something witty. Well, the show really, for several years, just put these actors on a soundstage, had long, supposedly meaningful silences, long stares exchanged between them, and the audience was in that way invited to fill in the blanks, in the same way that even Sansa Stark, in character within the show, is filling in the blanks or telling the audience to fill in the blanks. Just imagine that this character has some kind of motivation. Just imagine that this character has something meaningful to say. Just imagine that when Jon Snow asks Daenerys Targaryen what her political plan for the future is, imagine that when he asks her, how is she going to make a better world, imagine she has a good answer. Imagine these are characters who have the kinds of complex, nuanced political views and objectives that we got used to in the first 4 seasons. And what we're being presented with, again, is like a fill-in-the-blanks exercise, where the script just presents us with blanks that the writers never filled in. Now, again, obviously, the first 4 seasons were not like that. When Tyrion Lannister is put on trial, he stands there and gives a very inspirational speech, right? He stands there and speaks to the crowd. And he says that all his life he's been on trial because he's a dwarf, and he really lets us hear it. And he has some kind of political philosophy behind what he's saying, even if it's kind of ridiculous. This used to be a show in which every dialogue between Littlefinger and Varys, they really had something to say. They had their own political philosophy, and they were part of a sophisticated, socially complex world in which they were not the most important person. They were not a sole voice, an isolated voice on a soundstage. They were one voice in the midst of a cacophony, trying to decide what direction that society should move in. So guys, the finale for Season 8, there's a lot with it. Other channels will take the time to pick through all the crazy continuity errors. Why is it that in the Red Keep, the only part of the Red Keep that collapsed was the one part they needed to collapse to kill Cersei and Jaime, and then magically the whole rest of the building is intact? Only the part of the building that was featured in the sword fight between Sandor Clegane and Gregor Clegane was destroyed. Apparently the whole rest of the building, including the room Tyrion then convenes his meetings in the map room. All that was intact. So, gee, sure was unlucky for them. They didn't just have their sword fight in a different room, or Jaime and Cersei didn't just stay in the map room. They'd still be alive today. It's ridiculously bad writing. Ridiculous disregard for continuity. Arya Stark shows up on a white horse, and then bing, next episode, the white horse has disappeared. Sure, it's abysmally bad writing. We were promised a bittersweet ending, and I think the most bittersweet element is precisely this. Cast your mind back to how at one time you tried to introduce this show to your friends, to your brother, your sister, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. You used to tell other people, maybe 5 years ago, give this show a chance. There's something really meaningful here. There's something of value here. And now here we are in 2019, and we have to face up to the bittersweet fact that we were wrong.